My mother kept one secret for 51 years, and she chose the last hour of her life to hand it to me. She held my wrist with a grip that should not have been possible for a dying woman, pulled me down close to her mouth, and whispered four words that took everything I knew about my family and turned it to ash. I wish she hadn't. I have asked myself 100 times since then whether it was a gift or a punishment. I still don't know. But I know I can't carry it alone anymore, so I'm going to tell you the whole thing, from the beginning, the way it happened, in the small back room of a farmhouse in Holmes County, Ohio, by the light of a single oil lamp. My name is Hannah. I was born and raised Amish, and the woman dying in that bed was my mother, Miriam Bontrager, 74 years old, a quilter and a midwife, and the most upright woman in our church district. Or so I believed until that night. It was the second week of March, the kind of cold that gets into your knuckles and stays till noon. My mother had been failing since Christmas, and by March, the cancer had taken most of what was left of her. We don't fight these things the way the English do. No machines, no hospitals at the end. We had brought her home to the Dottie house, the little grandparent cottage attached to the main farm, and we sat with her in shifts, the way our people have always done. There were 5 of us children. My older brother Aaron, who farms the home place now, my sister Lydia, married off to a man in Indiana, my brother Samuel, the bishop's right hand, my younger sister Rachel, and me. I was the one who never married, the one who stayed. So when the end came near, it was me sitting in that chair at 2 in the morning, holding a cup of cold peppermint tea I'd forgotten to drink. The lamp was low. Outside, the wind pushed against the old windows. My mother had not spoken clearly in 2 days. She drifted in and out, calling names I didn't know, speaking sometimes in our German dialect, sometimes in English, which she rarely used. I thought she was already half gone. I thought the worst part was the waiting. Then her eyes opened, all the way open, clear as spring water. "Hannah," she said, not a whisper, a real voice, the voice from my childhood, the one that called me in from the garden at dusk. I leaned forward so fast I spilled the tea. "I'm here, ma'am. I'm right here." Her hand came up off the quilt and found my wrist. And the grip, I swear to you, was strong, stronger than mine. "There is a box," she said, "under the floor, in the sewing room, under the 3rd board from the window." I thought she was confused. I told her to rest. I told her we could talk about boxes in the morning. "There won't be a morning," she said, and she was right about that too. She pulled me down. Her breath smelled like the inside of a sick room, like medicine and something sweeter underneath that I didn't want to name. Her lips moved against my ear. "You have a sister," she said. "Her name is Grace, and she is not your father's." Then she let go of my wrist, settled back into the pillow, and closed her eyes. She breathed for another 40 minutes. She never spoke again. By the time the sky went gray over the barn, my mother was gone, and I was sitting in the dark with a sentence I could not put down. "You have a sister. Her name is Grace, and she is not your father's." I want you to understand what those words mean to a woman like me. To the English, maybe a secret sister is a surprise, a thing for a phone call and a hug and a happy ending on a talk show. For us, it's the ground opening under your feet. It means my mother, Miriam Bontrager, the woman who taught the young girls their first quilt stitches, the woman the bishop himself called on for counsel, had a child by a man who was not her husband. It means a lie that had lasted longer than I'd been alive. It means I didn't know who my mother was at all. If you have ever lost a parent, you know there's a grief in the dying. What nobody tells you is there can be a second grief after, when you learn the person you're mourning was someone you never met. If you've made it this far, stay with me, because what I found under that floor is the part I've been trying to say out loud for 2 years now. I didn't go to the sewing room that morning. I couldn't. There was too much to do. In our way, when someone dies, the whole community moves in like water filling a low place. By noon, there were 30 women in our kitchen. The men were building the coffin out in Aaron's shop, plain pine, the same as everyone gets, rich or poor, saint or sinner. The body was washed and dressed in white, the way my mother had dressed dozens of bodies herself over the years. We don't embalm. We don't take photographs. We sit with our dead in the front room with the furniture cleared out, and the neighbors come, and we sing the slow hymns from the Ausbund, and we wait 3 days. I moved through all of it like a woman underwater. My sister Rachel kept asking if I was all right, and I kept saying it was just the grief, which was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was sitting in my chest like a stone. Every time the bishop spoke a kind word about my mother's faithfulness, I felt the stone get heavier. It was the third night, after the viewing, after the last buggy had rattled off down the gravel lane, that I finally went into the sewing room with the lamp. The room still smelled like her, like cotton and beeswax and the lavender she kept in a dish on the windowsill. Her last quilt was still in the frame, half finished, the needle parked in the cloth where she'd left it in December when her hands got too weak. I almost couldn't do it. I almost left the board where it was and let the secret stay buried with her. But she'd given it to me. Out of 5 children, she'd given it to me, and I have never in my life been able to leave a thing half done. I counted the boards from the window. 1, 2, 3. I worked my fingernails into the seam and pulled, and the third board came up easier than it should have, like it had been lifted many times before. Underneath, in the dark space between the joists, was a tin box, an old one, the kind that used to hold saltine crackers with a faded picture of a farmhouse on the lid, rusted at the corners. I sat down on the floor with my back against the quilt frame, and I opened it. On top was a baby blanket. Yellow, hand-knit, small enough for a newborn. Not one of ours. The wool was finer than anything we'd make, and there was a little satin ribbon along the edge, which our Ordnung doesn't allow. I lifted it out and held it to my face, and under the dust there was still, faintly, the smell of a baby. After 50 years. I don't know how that's possible, but it's true. Under the blanket was a photograph. I need you to understand how wrong that was. We don't have photographs. Making a graven image is forbidden. In my whole childhood, I never once saw a picture of my own mother's face, except in the mirror of my own. And yet here, in her hand, hidden under the floor of her sewing room, was a small, square photograph, black and white, soft from being held. It was a young woman in English clothes, a dress with buttons, her hair down loose around her shoulders, no cap, no covering at all. She was laughing at whoever held the camera. She was maybe 19 years old, and she was, without any doubt, my mother. I had never seen my mother with her hair down. I had never seen my mother laugh like that, head back, mouth open, free. I sat on that cold floor and looked at a stranger who had my mother's face. And I understood for the first time that before she was Miriam Bontrager, faithful wife, she'd been someone else entirely, someone the family never spoke of, someone with her hair down, laughing in the English world. There was a man's arm around her shoulder. The photo was creased right down the middle of him, folded and unfolded so many times that his face had worn away to nothing. On purpose, I think. She'd kept the part of the picture that was herself and worn away the man until he was only an arm and a white shirt and a crease where a face should be. And under the photograph were the letters. A whole stack of them tied with string, the paper gone brown at the edges. Dozens of them. The top one was addressed in a man's handwriting to a name I didn't recognize. Miss Miriam Hostetler. But my mother's name before she married was Yoder. Miriam Yoder, of the Yoder family from over near Walnut Creek. Everyone knew that. So who was Miriam Hostetler? I untied the string with shaking hands and I started to read. To understand what those letters told me, I have to take you back before I was born, back to 1971, when my mother was 18 years old and her name really was Miriam Yoder. And she did a thing that our people almost never speak of out loud. She left. It happens more than the English think. A young person, during the running around years we call rumspringa, gets a taste of the outside world and decides to stay there. Most come back. A few don't. When they don't, when they leave for good and won't be baptized, the church places them under the ban, the shunning. And after that, the family doesn't speak their name. The chair at the table is taken away. It's as if the person died, except worse, because you know they're still out there living, and you may not so much as eat at the same table with them ever again. My mother left at 18. I learned this from her own letters, the ones she wrote and never sent, folded in among the ones she got. She left because a man came to the farm one summer to help with the threshing, an Englishman, a hired hand named Daniel Carter, 22 years old, with a truck and a guitar and a way of looking at her that made her forget the Ordnung existed. She ran off with him to Akron, She cut her hair. She wore the dress with the buttons. She got a job in a diner and learned to pour coffee for strangers, and she was, by every word she wrote, happier than she had ever been in her life. For 2 years, she was Miriam Hostetler, because that's the name she gave when they couldn't be married in any church that would have an Amish runaway and a Methodist boy. Hostetler was the name on the little apartment lease, the name the baby would have carried, because there was a baby. In the winter of 1973, my mother had a daughter in a hospital in Akron, Ohio. A little girl with a full head of dark hair. She named her Grace. The yellow blanket was Grace's blanket. The laughing photograph was taken 3 days before Grace was born, on the steps of that apartment, by Daniel Carter, whose face my mother later wore down to nothing with her own thumb. I sat on the floor of the sewing room until the lamp burned low, reading my mother's life. The life nobody in our family knew about. The life she'd buried under a floorboard in a 50-year lie. And here's where the story turns, where I learned the part I truly wish she hadn't told me. Because a runaway who comes home, who repents and confesses and bends the knee, our people will take her back. It's a hard road, but it's a known one. That's not the secret that haunted my mother. The secret was what happened to Grace. Daniel Carter died in the spring of 1974, a truck on a wet road outside Canton. My mother was 21 years old, alone in the English world with a baby and no husband and no family, because her family had already put her under the ban the day she left. She had nowhere to go, no money past the end of the month, a landlord who wanted the rent. So she went home. She put on a borrowed dress and a borrowed cap, and she drove the baby in a stranger's car to her father's farm, my grandfather's farm, and she stood in the lane and asked to come home. And my grandfather, Bishop Eli Yoder, a man I never met because he died before I was born, a man whose name was spoken in our house with nothing but reverence, told her she could come home on one condition. The baby could not. I read it in her own hand. She'd written it all down, years later, in a letter to Grace that she never sent, the longest letter in the box. She wrote that her father stood in the doorway of the only home she'd ever known and told her that the church would receive a repentant daughter, but it would not receive the child of her sin. The baby would have to be given to the English. There were agencies for that, good Christian families who couldn't have children of their own. The girl would have a fine life, better than anything an outcast Amish woman could give her. And in time, her father said, my mother would marry a good Amish man and have proper children, born inside the faith, and this whole sorrowful chapter would close like a door. She had 3 days to decide. My mother gave away her firstborn daughter on a Tuesday in May of 1974. She handed Grace, 16 months old, to a woman from a Mennonite adoption agency in a parking lot in Millersburg. And she kept the yellow blanket because the baby had a second one. And she got into her father's buggy and went home and was baptized that fall and married my father, Jonas Bontrager, 2 years after that. She never told him. She never told any of us. For 51 years, she sat in church beside the man who'd ordered her to give away her child. And after he died, she sat beside his portrait of righteousness in everyone's memory. And she carried Grace under a floorboard and in the worn-out crease of a photograph, and she said nothing until she gave it to me. I understand now why she chose me. Not because I was her favorite, because I was the one who stayed. The one with no husband to tell, no children to protect, no place in the careful machine of our community that the truth might break. She gave it to me because I was the only one who could carry it without it spilling. But I didn't want to carry it. That's the thing nobody tells you about a dying person's secret. They get to put it down. You have to pick it up. For a long time, weeks, I did nothing. I put the box back under the board. I went to the funeral. I stood with my brothers and sisters at the grave in the church cemetery. All the stones the same plain shape. My mother's no different from any other. And I listened to the bishop say she had run her race in faith and kept the narrow way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to dig up the grave and shake her and ask her how she could let me hold her hand all those years and never tell me I had a sister. But you don't scream at an Amish funeral. You sing the slow hymns and you eat the funeral pie and you go home. It was Rachel who first noticed something was wrong with me. My younger sister, the one who notices everything. She came by the Dottie house a month after the funeral, when I was supposed to be packing up Mother's things. and she found me sitting in the sewing room with the box open in my lap. I hadn't heard the buggy. I hadn't heard the door. I looked up and there she was, in the doorway, looking at the photograph in my hand. For a second, neither of us moved. "Is that," Rachel said slowly, "is that, ma'am?" I could have lied. I'm not proud of how close I came to lying, but I was so tired of holding it. "Sit down," I said. "There's something you need to know." I told her everything. I read her the letters, I showed her the blanket, and my sister Rachel, who is the gentlest soul I know, sat very still through all of it. And at the end, she did something I didn't expect. She got angry, not at our mother, at our grandfather. "He made her do it," Rachel said. Her voice was shaking. "He stood in the door of his own house and he made his daughter give away her baby. And we put his name on the prayer list every year. We named Samuel's boy after him." "He thought he was protecting the church," I said, though I don't know why I was defending him. "He was protecting himself," Rachel said. "He didn't want a bishop's daughter with an English baby. He didn't want the shame at his own table. So he gave the shame to Ma'am and made her carry it her whole life. And she did. She carried it alone, for us, so we could grow up never knowing our family had a crack in it." I had never heard Rachel speak like that. We're not raised to question the old ones. We're raised to submit. Gelassenheit, it's called. The giving up of the self, the yielding. My mother had yielded so completely that she'd yielded her own daughter. "There's something else," I said. "Grace might still be alive. She'd be 52 now. The agency was in Millersburg. There are records." Rachel looked at me for a long moment, and then she said the thing that started everything that came after. "Then we have to find her." Now I have to tell you about the wall we hit, because finding a person the English gave away 50 years ago is not a simple thing for two Amish women who don't drive, don't have telephones in our homes, and have never once in our lives sat in front of a computer. We did have one thing. We had Mr. Brennan. Tom Brennan ran the hardware store in town, the one with the hand-painted sign, and he'd known our family for 30 years. He was English, a heavy-set man in his 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he'd always treated our people square. When Aaron needed something special ordered, Brennan got it. When the youth needed a ride to a faraway wedding, Brennan's nephew drove the van. He was what we call a good Englisher, the kind who helps and doesn't ask too many questions. I went to him because I had nowhere else to go. I told him I was looking for adoption records from a Mennonite agency in Millersburg from 1974. I didn't tell him why. He looked at me over those reading glasses for a moment, and then he just nodded, the way he nodded when Aaron ordered a part. And he said, "Let me see what I can find." It took him 3 weeks. 3 weeks of me coming into town on flimsy excuses, buying nails I didn't need, asking with my eyes. And then one Thursday, he waved me into the back office and shut the door. "The agency closed in 1989, he said, "but the state took the records. Ohio opened up the old adoption files a few years back. A person can request their own. The trouble is, the adoptee has to be the one to ask. You can't pull it from her side. You can only wait for her to come looking." My heart dropped. "So there's no way." "I didn't say that." Brennan took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "There's a thing now, DNA. People spit in a tube, mail it off, and these websites match them up with relatives they never knew they had. If your sister ever did one of those, and one of you did one too, the computer would put you together." "We can't," I said. "It's not our way. Photographs, computers, sending your own blood off in the mail to strangers, the bishop would never." Brennan looked at me a long time. "Hannah," he said, "I've known your family 30 years. I'm going to say something and you can tell me to mind my business. But it seems to me you didn't come in here for nails. It seems to me you've got a reason that matters more than the bishop's comfort. And it seems to me the only person who can decide what your way is when it comes to your own sister is you." I want to tell you I prayed on it. I did. But I think I'd already decided, sitting on that cold floor with Grace's blanket in my hands. I did the DNA test. Rachel did one too. We did it in secret, in the back of Brennan's store, spitting into little tubes like criminals, and Brennan mailed them off for us and let the results come to his address because we don't get that kind of mail. And then we waited. Spring turned to summer. The corn came up. My mother's grave settled and grew over with grass. I'd nearly given up. I'd half decided it was God's answer, that the silence meant the door my grandfather closed was meant to stay closed. Then, in August, Brennan sent his nephew out to the farm with a note. The note said, "Come to the store, there's a match." I have read a great deal in my life about the moment people meet a long-lost relative. The English make television shows of it, all tears and music. What I felt, standing in the back of that hardware store while Brennan turned his computer screen toward me, was something closer to terror. There was a name on the screen. A woman. The match said, "Sister, half," and the name was not Grace. It was Grace. She'd kept it. Through everything, through being given away, through whatever life she'd lived, the name my mother gave her in a hospital in Akron had stayed. Grace. Her last name was English, a married name I won't share here, and there was a small photograph next to it, the way the English put their faces on everything. And I have to tell you, when I looked at that photograph, I had to grab the edge of Brennan's desk, because the woman on that screen, 52 years old, gray coming into her dark hair, was the spitting image of my mother. Not the laughing girl in the button dress, the other one, the one I knew, the set of the jaw, the straight back, the eyes that didn't quite trust the camera. Grace had grown up to look exactly like the mother who gave her away. We wrote her a letter. It took me 4 days to write 4 paragraphs. How do you tell a stranger that the mother she never knew kept her blanket for 50 years under a floor? How do you say your mother is dead? But here's the proof she never stopped loving you. In her own hand, in a stack of letters she was too ashamed and too bound to ever send. I just told the truth. I told her who I was. I told her our mother had died in March and that her last words to me were Grace's name. I told her there was a box. I told her that if she never wanted to hear from us again, I would understand, and we would never trouble her, but that she should know she had been wanted, even when she was given away, especially then. Brennan mailed it, and we waited again. While we waited, the thing I'd been dreading finally came. The bishop found out. I should have known he would. In our world, secrets don't keep. Someone saw me going into the back of Brennan's store too many times. Someone's cousin worked at the post office and noticed the strange mail. By September, the talk had reached Bishop Mast, and one evening his buggy came up our lane, and my brother Samuel was with them. And I knew before they were through the door. They sat in my front room, the two of them, the bishop with his long gray beard and his hat on his knee, and Samuel beside him with a face like a closed gate. And the bishop asked me, gently at first, what business I had with the English and their machines. So I told him all of it. I figured the truth had been buried long enough. I watched it land. I watched the bishop's face, which I'd known my whole life as the face of mercy, go hard and careful. And when I was done, he was quiet for a long time. And then he said the thing I'll remember until I'm in the ground myself. He said, "Your grandfather was a wise man. He did what had to be done to keep this district pure. Your mother understood that. She made her peace with it. And now you want to drag it all back into the light 50 years on and shame the dead." He shook his head slowly. "Some doors, Hannah, the Lord closes for a reason. It is pride to open them." And Samuel, my own brother, would not look at me. I want to tell you, I stood up to him in that moment, that I found the words. I didn't. I sat there in my own front room and let him call my mother's grief a closed door, and my search for my sister a sin of pride. Because that's how we're raised, to yield. But something had changed in me. Down in the place where my mother had yielded her whole life, something in me had finally stopped yielding. I didn't argue with the bishop. I just looked at him and I asked one question. "If it was your daughter," I said, "would you have closed the door?" He didn't answer. He put on his hat and he left, and Samuel left with him. And I knew that whatever came next, I'd crossed a line in our community that doesn't get uncrossed. 3 days later, the letter from Grace came back. I almost couldn't open it. Rachel was with me. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where the bishop had sat, and I held the envelope and my hands wouldn't work. Finally, Rachel took it from me and opened it herself and read it out loud, because I couldn't. Grace wrote that she had cried for 2 days when our letter came. She wrote that she'd always known she was adopted, that her parents, good people, dairy farmers from Wayne County, had told her young and told her kindly. She wrote that she'd searched for her birth mother once, in her 30s, and hit a wall, and given up, and made her peace with never knowing. She wrote that she'd married, raised 2 sons, lost her husband to a heart attack 5 years back, and that she'd thought all the surprises of her life were behind her. And then she wrote this, and Rachel's voice broke reading it, and I'm not ashamed to say mine is breaking now telling it. She wrote, "All my life I wondered if she ever thought about me, if giving me away was easy for her. You've told me she kept my blanket for 50 years under the floor where she did her sewing. You've told me she wore away a photograph trying to forget a face, but couldn't make herself wear away mine. I have spent 50 years believing I was something a woman could set down and walk away from. You have given me back a mother who could not, who never did, not for one day. I wish I could have met her, but you have given me the next best thing. You have given me the truth, and I would very much like to meet the sisters who went looking for me when they didn't have to." We met Grace on the first Saturday in October. Brennan drove us, his nephew's van, all the way to a diner, halfway between her world and ours, in a town neither of us belonged to, which seemed right. Rachel and I sat on one side of the booth in our plain dresses and caps, and Grace came in the door in English clothes, and she stopped when she saw us, and we stopped looking at her, and the whole diner seemed to go quiet, though it probably didn't. She looked like our mother, I've said that, but seeing it standing up, walking toward us, alive, was a different thing. It was like our mother had been given back to us at 30 years younger, in trousers, with a purse on her shoulder and tears already running down her face. She didn't shake my hand. She pulled me up out of the booth and held on to me, this stranger, this sister. And over her shoulder, I could see Rachel with her hand pressed over her mouth, and Brennan by the door pretending to look at the menu. And I thought, my mother should be here. My mother should be the one holding her. 51 years too late, but she should be here. I had brought the box. We sat in that booth for 4 hours. I gave Grace the blanket, and she held it to her face the same way I had. And I don't think either of us said anything for a while. I gave her the photograph of our mother laughing, young and free, 3 days before Grace was born. Grace looked at it for a long time, and then she said the strangest, truest thing. "She looks happy," Grace said. "I'm glad. I always hoped, wherever she was, that she'd had at least a little while of being happy." And I had to tell her that the happiness in that photo lasted about as long as the photo took to develop, that Daniel Carter, her father, died on a wet road before her second birthday, that the happiness was real, but it was short, and what came after was 50 years of carrying her under a floorboard in a house full of people who never knew she existed. Grace read every letter, the ones our mother received from Daniel before he died, the ones our mother wrote to Grace over the years and never sent. There was one for every birthday. 51 of them, I learned, though I'd only counted the bundle roughly that first night. Every January on Grace's birthday, my mother had sat in her sewing room and written a letter to the daughter she gave away, and folded it, and put it under the floor, and gone on with her day. 51 letters, 51 years, a whole second life lived entirely in the dark. I have read all of them now, more than once. Some are only a line or two. The year I turned 6, my mother wrote to Grace, "Your sister Hannah started school today. She has your stubborn chin." I almost called her Grace by mistake. I sat with that one a long while. I'd had a sister my whole life, walking around inside my mother's grief, and I never knew her name was so close to my own. Some of the letters are angry. There is one written the winter after her own father died that is just 4 words pressed so hard into the paper the pen tore through. It says, "He never said sorry." She never sent it. She put it under the floor with the rest and went and sang at his funeral and named her grandson after him, because that is what a yielded woman does. She swallows the tear in the paper and she sings. And some are just love, plain love with nowhere to go. The last one, written the January before she died, when her hands were already shaking from the sickness, says only this: "I am old now, Grace. I do not have long. I have prayed every day of my life that someone would tell you what I could not. If you are reading this, then someone did, and the Lord is kinder than the men who spoke for him. Forgive your grandfather. Forgive your church. You do not have to forgive me. Just know your name was the first thing I said in the morning and the last thing I thought at night, for 50 years. Your ma'am." I think she wrote that one knowing she would give the box to me, knowing I would go and find her daughter. It was not a confession. It was a set of instructions, written in love, by a woman who had finally run out of years to obey anyone but her own heart. I'm going to tell you how it ended, the dark part and the light part, because both are true and I won't lie to you about either. The dark part is this. When I came home from meeting Grace, the bishop put me under the ban. Not the full shunning, not at first, a warning, a period of separation to consider my pride and my disobedience and my trafficking with the English world. Samuel didn't speak to me for the whole winter. Aaron, my older brother, told me I'd shamed our mother's memory, which is a thing I'll carry the rest of my life. Because I believe with my whole heart, I did the opposite. Lydia wrote from Indiana to say she was praying for my soul. Only Rachel stood with me, my gentle sister, who got angry one time in the sewing room and never stopped. She told the bishop that if I was under the ban for finding our sister, then he could put her under it too. And he very nearly did. I won't pretend it didn't cost us. It cost us a great deal. There are tables in this district I can't eat at anymore. There are people I grew up with who look through me now like I'm a window. When you're raised inside something as close as we are, that kind of cold is a real winter. And I've been living in it for 2 years. But here's the light part, and it's bigger than the dark if you give it time. Grace comes to see us now. She can't come to church and we can't ride in her car to her home as easily as we'd like, but she comes to the farm, and she sits in our kitchen, and she's learning a few words of our German. And last spring, she helped Rachel and me put up 40 quarts of tomatoes and laughed the whole time at how bad she was at it. She has our mother's hands. We've all noticed it. The same way of holding a knife. The same set to the shoulders when she's working. And here's the thing I didn't expect. Slowly, one by one, the wall has cracked. Rachel's husband came around first, then his brother. A few of the younger families. They'd meet Grace, see our mother in her face, hear the story, and something in them would shift. You can call a thing pride from a pulpit, but it's hard to look at a 52-year-old woman crying over her dead mother's letters and call it pride to your own face. This past Christmas, 8 people sat at my table who weren't speaking to me the Christmas before. Grace was at the head of it, in the chair that would have been our mother's. We read the letters out loud, all 51. Every birthday our mother wrote her in the dark. It took most of the night. Nobody wanted to stop. The bishop still won't receive me. Samuel still won't look at me in town. Some doors, it turns out, stay closed, just not the ones my grandfather meant. People ask me, the few English I've told, whether I'm angry at my mother. For the lie. For laying it on me in her last hour. For making me carry what she couldn't. I'm not. I used to be. That first winter I was angry enough to crack stone. But I've come to understand something about my mother that I didn't understand when she was alive. And it's this. She didn't give me a secret on her deathbed. She gave me a daughter back. She couldn't do it while she lived. The world she lived in, the one her own father built, wouldn't allow it. So she waited until she was halfway out the door, beyond the reach of the ban, beyond the reach of shame, and then she handed her firstborn to the one child she trusted to go and get her. She wished she hadn't had to. I know that now. The whole secret, the whole 50 years of silence, was the wish she carried that she hadn't had to choose between her church and her child. And me? The title of my own story, I suppose, is true. I wish she hadn't. I wish she hadn't had to give Grace away. I wish she hadn't had to lie for 50 years. I wish she hadn't waited until the last hour so that I never got to tell her, to her face, while she could still hear me, that she'd done the bravest thing a mother can do. She'd kept her child's name alive in the dark for 51 years, against a whole world that wanted that child forgotten. But there's another way to read those words. I found it, slowly, the way you find anything that matters. I wish she hadn't, and I'm so glad she did. My mother is buried in the church cemetery, under a plain stone like all the others. But Grace and Rachel and I, we planted a tree at the corner of the farm last spring, a young apple tree, where the lane meets the road. It's not a graven image. It's not against the ordinance. It's just a tree, but all 3 of us know what it is. It's the marker our mother never got, for the part of her life that was never allowed above ground. This past week, the first blossoms came out on it, white, the whole crown of it, against a sky the color of the photograph. Grace drove out to see it. We stood there, the 3 of us, 3 daughters of one woman who carried more than any one heart should have to. Some things take 50 years to come up into the light. But when they do, the whole family knows it. If my mother taught me anything in the end, it's this. The secrets we keep to protect the people we love are still secrets. And love that has to hide under a floorboard isn't free. She gave me the box so it wouldn't have to hide anymore. So Grace wouldn't have to hide anymore. So that somewhere down the years, a granddaughter she never met could say her name out loud in a warm kitchen and mean it. Grace, my sister. Wanted from the first day to the last. I wish she hadn't had to keep it secret. I'm so glad she finally didn't. Thank you for sitting with me through all of it. If you've ever carried something for someone you loved, something heavy, something you couldn't set down, I think you understand why I had to tell it. Some stories don't belong to us alone. They belong to everyone they were meant to find. May your family be honest with you while there's still time to hold their hand. May the doors that should be open in your life not stay closed for 50 years. And may every name that's been kept in the dark, in your family or mine, one day be said out loud in the light, where it belongs.